Growing up, my parents taught me a lot of lessons. But the one that stood out to me the most, that really changed the way I brought myself into this world, was the one when they said, "All right, Michael, now no matter how good you are, no matter how smart you get, know that every person on this earth, no matter what their circumstance is, no matter who they are, they know something you don't. They've experienced something that you have never gone through. Never forget that." They might not have known this at the time, but what that did for me was it incensed this insatiable curiosity in and deep, deep appreciation for the individual. And that curiosity and appreciation ultimately led me down the road to photography. Photography has afforded me the opportunity to gain access to several institutions and several people that I never would have otherwise met. A few years ago, I found myself in a women's prison. I was supposed to be doing a documentary project around nonviolent communication to tell the story of this workshop. And I'm in this room full of women chained to a desk. And the whole time, they're sharing these stories, and I'm snapping pictures, composing an image, snapping another picture, composing, snapping another one, capturing some video, composing, snapping another picture. All that until one woman, one individual, said the only thing that she hoped for in this world was to be able to hold her son one more time and hear him say, "Mom, I love you." Now, this is a person who can't even put her hands together, whose only dream is to hold her son and hear him say, "Mom, I love you." At that moment, everybody in the room, including myself, knew that this was one dream that would probably never become a reality. In this sacred moment, I stopped seeing her as a subject that I was composing into this frame and started seeing her as that individual. The individual with her own background and history and experiences and things that to teach and things to offer. So I had to put down the camera because in that sacred moment, I realized that that very thing and that very skill that got me into this door was the exact same thing that was keeping us from being human with each other. So I left that experience and I really thought about that very deeply. I went home and I was like, just didn't feel right. I realized I was trying to tell somebody else's story. I can't do that. No matter how good I ever become with a camera, I cannot tell somebody else's story. A few months after that, I found myself working with a group of houseless young people. They were in this work program to create zines, learn work skills, add experiences to their resume, get letters of recommendation. And the idea was that I was going to go in and create some portraits that they could then use in that project. But I was thinking about my parents looking down on me and saying that there's something you can learn from everybody. Never go into an experience thinking that you know what they know. And I was also thinking about that experience in the women's prison and how that camera became both a key and a barrier. So I left the camera at home. The first week I showed up, sat there, and waited. And then the second week I showed up, I sat there, and I waited. And at the very same time I was engaged in this conversation with a room full of executives that's talking about how we're going to solve homelessness. So one day I'm in this room with a room full of executives talking about how we're going to solve the problem of homelessness. And then the very next day, I'm in another room with a group of young people who are talking about the experiences of homelessness and how nobody else understands. That third week, I was invited to participate in the conversation. And so they asked me, "Hey, Michael, all right, what do you want us to do for these portraits?" And I said, "Well, I've been hanging out with this group of CEOs and executives, and we're talking about how we're going to fix your problem. Now, I think it's interesting that we're always talking about you, but we're not talking with you. I was just invited to show an exhibition telling your story. How would you feel if you told your story? And they were down. So I brought them all cameras because that's what I'm good at, but told them, like, hey, here's some photographic knowledge and how-to and color theory and composition theory and stuff like that, but you go do whatever you need to do to tell your story. And yeah, they came back with images, but they also came back with illustrations and poetry and written stories, performance art. And when we had this hackathon, it was the very first time that the people from the C-suite, at least these people from their C-suites, and the people who had just stepped off of the street were in the same room at the same time, looking at the exact same art. And one of those executives turned to me when he looked at one of the images and said, "Wow, this is great. Michael, did you do that?" And I responded, "No, that was actually Bubbles right here. She's right here." And he looked at her and said, "Huh. Huh. You do have skills and creativity." And Bubbles looked at him and said, "Huh. You do have a soul." So, that to me was the greatest piece of art I ever could have thought put together. And they continued to talk with each other, and those perceptions and stereotypes and preconceived ideas of who the other person were just fell away, and they engaged in a real, meaningful conversation. A job was created that day. But not only was that job created, but they talked about some of the other problems that wouldn't have come up if it weren't for the fact that these two people with completely different experiences and backgrounds were really talking with each other. What happens when you want to mail me a check, but you don't have an address to send it to? What happens when I show up to work and I'm treated like a charity case instead of somebody who has value? What happens then? How do we create a culture in this organization that's safe for not just the people that are already there, but for the people that you're trying to bring in? How do we make that a wonderful, thriving place? And that happened. Creative, sustainable, meaningful solutions happen right then and right there because two people who otherwise wouldn't have been in the same room got together, started talking, and saw each other as real people. So yeah, photography, for me, is a tool that allows me to serve as a bridge between communities that might not otherwise know each other. They might not otherwise occupy intimate time and space. But it's also that thing that can create that barrier. It can't do the job for me. It can get me close, but it can't do the work. I invite you to look at whatever that thing is for you. Know your skill, know your talent, or skills, or talents. Be good at them, excel at them, learn them, be excellent. But never forget that it will never do the work for you, because sometimes the magic happens between the frames. Thank you.